Welcome back, everybody. This is Nicole from Wildflower Valley Farm. Today, come walk with me through the garden and I'm going to take you on a tour of the raised beds and the backyard garden. So we'll start here in the front yard with my wisteria tree. I gave it a severe trimming just last weekend. Well, it's been probably 10 days ago, I guess, when I trimmed it. This was a monster that was trying to take over the entire front yard. The mailman couldn't even get to the front porch to deliver packages. But I trimmed it back. It'll be fine. I can't kill it. I've actually tried. It cannot be killed, I'm convinced. But I have found that when I trim it severely, it doesn't matter what time of year, obviously in the winter it doesn't, but when I trim it severely, it tries to bloom again. And that is what it is doing. That's not the reason that I trimmed it. I trimmed it because it was becoming a monster that was going to try to come in the house if I didn't get a handle on it. But a side effect of trimming seems to be that it will bloom again, even in late summer like this. Down under this wisteria tree, I have some volunteer asparagus. I did not plant this asparagus. I honestly have no idea where it came from, but it is growing at the foot of the wisteria tree, and I'm going to let it. We'll start with the raised bed that is closest to the house, and not much has changed since I did the raised bed tour about a month ago. It's maybe 3 weeks ago. This bed is pretty much the same. It's still quite overgrown. There is a little garden friend hiding in the grass in between the raised beds. I don't know how well you guys can see her there in the middle. That is what I have always grown up calling a riding spider. I don't know how well you guys can see her web here. There is some zigzagging, like a zigzagging pattern in her web. And that is why I have always grown up calling them riding spiders, is because of that zigzagging pattern. This is the only type of spider that does not cause me to flip out when I see them. But we're going to move along and leave her alone, and maybe she will move on and find a new place to live. This is my center raised bed. The weeds have grown quite a bit in the last few weeks. I really need to get in here and pull these out. I had them pulled out, and then we got a month's worth of rain in about a week's amount of time, and the weeds kind of took over. My chard is just about spent. It is still trying to put out leaves, but as you can see, they all pretty much look like this one. The bugs are eating it, and it's just very slow growing. Partly because of the heat and partly because of its age. This chard is on its second year, and 2 years is about the most you can get, or the most that I can get out of chard. So very soon I'm going to pull all of this chard out of this bed and prep this bed for some new plants to go in it very soon. And this raised bed is the one that is the furthest from the house. This is a Paddy Pan Squash that is growing very well. It's got some nice blooms on it, no fruit on it yet. This is another Paddy Pan Squash that I planted at the same time that I planted this one. Don't really know if it's going to grow big enough to actually make fruit or not. It's trying to make blooms, but I think this may be all that I get out of this plant this year. And these are my purple beans. I think they may be called a burgundy bean. The bugs have had their way with these plants, so they are just about gone for the season. If I planned a little better, I could have planted some succession of these, planted a few earlier in the spring and some more a little later to have a second crop. Those are my painted pony beans. They are just about as rough looking as the burgundy beans. I'm actually leaving the beans that you still see on the vine on purpose to let those mature so that I can save those for seeds for next year. And the zucchini that I had in this bed was about here, and it is gone. The squash vine borers did get to it, unfortunately, and I think I got maybe 3 or 4 zucchinis off of it before it bit the dust. And then I have just a few more Swiss chard plants here left in this bed. I'm going to prune these and see if maybe we can get, you know, a little bit more out of it, but it's about time to pull these up and feed them to the chickens and plant some new ones. Coming to the side yard, please excuse my grass that needs to be mowed. I have a trellis here with some cucumber vines, and I will put on the screen the variety of cucumbers these are. I cannot remember at the moment, but I will put that on the screen. These have not grown as well as I would have hoped. You can see that they're growing and they do have blooms. But I planted these early enough in the season that I kind of expected this entire goat panel to be covered. And as you can see, it is not. And I'm not really sure why this section of vine has died. The plant itself is fine, but that one stem has died. Something has damaged it somehow. You can see a couple of little hairy cucumbers on there, though. But those are on the vine that died, so those are not going to get any bigger. This is the first year that I have planted anything in this particular section of the yard. So I'm sure part of the problem is soil quality. You can see all of this dead stuff here is just where I've, you know, pulled up weeds and laid them down to kind of use them as a mulch layer. So next year I may or may not grow something here again. But if I do, then, you know, just adding more compost and rabbit manure to the soil should hopefully help it to grow better next year. Right across from the cucumbers, I have this volunteer vine that is just covered in flowers. This came up a few years ago, and every year it gets bigger. There has been a time where it just completely covered this whole entire wall, but I have tried to cut it back and keep it a little bit under control. I believe this is called Confederate Jasmine. I'm not 100% sure, but I also expected Confederate Jasmine to have a smell, and this has no smell at all, but it sure is pretty. In this little corner near the house, I have some watermelons growing, and I will put the name of this variety on the screen as well. It's an orange watermelon. I cannot remember the name, but the flesh is supposed to be orange. This is the first year that I have grown this variety. And you can see a little watermelon there. Again, this is something else that I planted earlier enough in the year that I kind of expected it to do better. But this is 3 watermelon vines combined, and I would have expected it to completely take over a much larger space than this. But it didn't. And I don't know, again, if it's the variety of watermelon, if it's more slow growing than other varieties that I have grown, or if it was just poor soil quality, because prior to this year, this has just been lawn and not garden. So I have added some amendments, but it takes time to kind of build up your soil quality. So hopefully next year, if I plant something here, it will do better. This is a blueberry bush that is struggling to make it. This is the first year that it's been in the ground. It's still alive, but the weather was so dry for a while that everything struggled due to drought. Now, of course, it's had plenty of water, and it is coming back and beginning to do well, but I need to do a little bit of research on whether blueberries need to be pruned, because it kind of looks like this one does. This is another blueberry that I planted at the same time as that first one. They were about the same size when I planted them, but this one has not grown as big as the first one that I showed you. There's another blueberry right here This one I almost killed. I actually bought it last year and forgot about it, and it managed to survive the winter anyway. So I planted it back early this year, maybe February is when I put it in the ground. In this corner behind the greenhouse, I have a tote that has a couple of tomatoes and a marigold. It did have a squash in it, but again, the squash vine borers got to it. I need to harvest these tomatoes. This vine has laid down and is kind of taking over this corner of the fence here. This is another tomato in a bucket. It's the same variety as the one that I just showed you. I believe it's a Golden Jubilee. I will look that up and put it on the screen for sure, but I believe these orange ones are called a Golden Jubilee. But it has done pretty well. There's actually 2 plants in this 5-gallon bucket, and it has done pretty well this summer. This is a fig tree that someone gave me. This is the first year that I have attempted to grow figs. It was too young when I put it in the ground to actually make fruit this year, but I am hoping that it will come back and do well to make some fruit for us next year. Here next to it is a Paddy Pan Squash. And I don't know how well you guys can see this, but that is one single squash plant. I have been amazed at some of these Paddy Pan Squash this year, just the plants themselves, at how big they have gotten. Just outside the fence is a little herb garden. I have some lemon balm right here. And then in this planter, I have some chocolate mint. Over here beside the mint and the lemon balm, I have some rosemary. This is a huge plant that has probably been in the ground for 8 or 10 years, and it loves this spot. Next to the house over here, I have a gorgeous elderberry plant. I bought this last year, and it has fruited for the first time this year. So I'm going to harvest those and dry them, and I primarily use them for elderberry syrup, so that is my plan for the elderberries this year. I really need to trim the weeds in between the beehives, but these are my 2 beehives. This is my original hive. It actually needs some paint work done to it. This spring it swarmed twice within 7 days. And the first swarm got up so high that I was not able to reach it where it gathered, but the second swarm I was able to catch and collect. And this is the second swarm. I need to add another box on top of this one, but it seems to be doing very well. In my backyard garden, this is the biggest part of the garden that is in the ground. I have some red noodle beans, and as you can see, they are just hanging full of beans. I just harvested these 2 days ago, and they are ready to be harvested again. I have been so pleased with these noodle beans and how prolific they are. I am definitely saving seeds from these to plant some more for next year. I think, if I'm not mistaken, there are either 6 or 8 plants is all I planted right here on this trellis this year, and that has been more than enough. We get enough off of it every time I harvest it for 1, sometimes 2 meals every single time that I harvest off of these few plants. Next to the beans, I have my tomato trellis. This is a goat panel that is about 10 feet long. These tomatoes have been pruned just recently. I harvested all that I could get off of these again just a few days ago, and they are just getting ripe almost faster than we can harvest them. The ones on that end, I ran out of daylight the day that I was pruning these, so the ones on that end have not been pruned. And then right here at the feet of the tomatoes, I have several marigolds. Some of these have done better than others. The ones that are closest to the privacy fence haven't gotten as much sun, so they haven't grown as big. They've still grown, just not as big. And then coming around to the opposite side of the very same goat panel, I planted okra, and I do know that I planted this okra too close together. But last year, after a little experiment that I did, I discovered that okra can be planted a lot closer together than what the package says. And it still produces and does just fine. As you can see, some of the tomatoes are coming over to say hello to the okra. This is just a mixture of several different types of okra. I had seeds from several different varieties, and I just kind of mixed them all up together and planted them all. I have some red and some green of various different sorts. And next to the okra, just a few feet away, I have some cayenne peppers. My plan is to make my own hot sauce from these cayenne peppers. We don't eat a lot of hot peppers, but we do like hot sauce. So I'm going to try to harvest some of these peppers. Look how gorgeous and red they are. And just how many peppers are hanging on this to turn red soon. My plan is to harvest these, and I haven't found a recipe yet, but I'm hoping to make some fermented hot sauce. It just intrigues me. I've never made hot sauce before, but it's something that I've always wanted to try, and so I'm going to try it this year. This sunflower comes up from the ground right here and leans way over in directions that whatever direction it wanted to go. This is part of the same stem going this direction. It branches off down at the bottom in the ground. And they've just gone everywhere. There are so many flowers on this that it is having a hard time standing up. And I just love sunflowers. This is the yellow squash that I planted a few weeks ago. And unfortunately, the chickens still got to it and ate a bunch of the leaves off of it, but it is trying to come back. It's a little bit slow getting started, but of course you can see that it has powdery mildew on it, so that is slowing its growth down too. I think that is a result of all of the rain that we had last week. I kid you not, guys, we got 7 inches of rain in about a 24-hour period. And then we got a break, and then it rained 2 more inches just a few days later. This is the last of my zucchini. This is a ginormous vine that comes out of the ground here and comes all the way around. And this is the end of it right here. It has battled the squash vine borers and seems to have survived. It's still making zucchinis for me, despite the powdery mildew that's on it. These leaves that are up closer to the top aren't as bad with the mildew as some of the ones that are closer to the ground. This is what is left of the Paddy Pan Squash that I showed you guys in my squash planting video from a couple weeks ago. It also has succumbed to the squash vine borers. This is, again, is just one single plant. These Paddy Pan Squash plants have gotten huge. But I think this is about the best this one is going to do. I don't think it's going to make any more fruit for me. It's still trying to bloom out here on the end, but I just don't think that it's going to make it. This here, right slam in the middle of my garden, is my middle of the garden compost pile. This is where I throw things that I can't or don't want to feed to the chickens. It is just a little wire ring. It's not exactly round, but just a little wire ring. And this is where I've been putting the shavings that I've been cleaning out of the duck and chick pens. Of course, there's some grass growing out of the side of it. But I've thrown, some rotten eggs in here. And right next to the garden is a very nice tall stand of lamb's quarters, and I've heard that they taste really good. We have not tried them, but they grow prolifically here in my yard, and every time that I pull some up, I either throw them to the chickens or I throw them in the compost here. Right here next to the garden in this planter, I have one lonely little nasturtium plant. I actually planted 6 seeds. I wasn't trying to plant many, but I planted 6 back in the spring, and this is the only one that came up. And I know you guys are wondering, why does this crazy lady have a toilet bowl brush in her planter? That would be because the chickens are right next door, and I use that brush to clean their water when I change their water. And that is a clean brush. It has never been used in a toilet. I bought it brand new and brought it straight out here to use for that purpose. But it works great. The only thing I don't like about it is how flimsy this handle is. It was cheap. I think I paid $2 for it. But that's why it's sitting here. I poked a hole in the bottom of that little holder there so that it can drain and stay dry. But that is why it is sitting in the planter with my flower. So there you have it. There is a tour of my little garden. It's not much. It's not like some people's, acre-sized garden. But on my little 1/10 of an acre postage stamp lot here in town, I feel like we've got a lot going on here. If you like this video and want to see more garden tour videos or more gardening videos, or just, what kind of things can be done on a tiny postage stamp lot, be sure to click subscribe down below this video and follow along to see what else we've got going on here. Thanks for watching.